The internet has been surprisingly quiet about IO Interactive's upcoming Bond game, First Light. And after spending hours researching what IO is doing behind the scenes, it hit me. This game deserves way more attention than it's getting. Now, I've gone through the CEO interviews, dissected the trailer footage, and compiled everything that we actually know about this project, and what IO is building could fundamentally change how we think about both Bond games and spy games in general. And if you're new here, welcome. For everyone else, you already know what it is. I'm Sav, this ain't your average YouTube clickbait. Let's dive in. Now, to understand where we are today with Bond games, you have to have a basic understanding of where we came from. Even if you don't have an appreciation for Bond games, you owe them a great deal of gratitude every time you boot up games like Call of Duty or CSGO. For most younger gamers today, the name GoldenEye might not even mean much. But for the OGs, the ones who grew up with Nintendo 64s, it's legendary. Now, GoldenEye 007 didn't just bring Bond to gaming, it laid the actual foundation for every multiplayer shooter that we now know. Back before online matches and huge esports arenas, friends would gather around the TV for their GoldenEye split-screen death matches. And just when you thought Bond multiplayer couldn't get any crazier, Nightfire showed up with its grappling hooks, guided rockets, and that insane ski resort map with the cable car lifts. Now, this legendary experience became the blueprint for every arena shooter that followed. Counter-Strike, Halo, Call of Duty, they all owe something to those split-screen Bond sessions. But over time, the Bond games started going stale, and the industry kind of pulled back away from them. Games like Call of Duty and Halo began taking over, and Bond took a back seat. But while Bond games were taking their extended vacation, that same gaming industry started exploding. Games started pulling in more money than movies, and MGM realized they were missing out. So recently, they got smart and partnered with IO Interactive, the studio that turned assassination into an art form with their Hitman series. And that's exactly why all eyes are on IO Interactive and First Light. This could be the shot of adrenaline that Bond gaming desperately needed for years. And after more than a decade in the wilderness, Bond could be back in a big way. So what exactly is IO Interactive bringing to the table with 007 First Light? Well, first of all, MGM gave them complete creative freedom, and IO's first move was a departure from all previous Bond games. No movie adaptations, no nostalgia casting. They're creating a brand new Bond origin story from scratch. We're talking about a young James Bond who hasn't earned his legendary 007 status yet, and if you know IO's work on Hitman, you know these guys know how to make a stealth game. IO understands that Bond isn't Agent 47, and if there's one thing that they've stated multiple times, it's that First Light will not be a reskinned Hitman game. Based on gameplay reveals and insider info, First Light will be more of a hybrid experience, a love child, so to speak, between Hitman and the Uncharted games, injected with that suave British super spy Bond aura. What IO has created here brings in the freedom, map design, tools, weapons, and AI of their Hitman games, but instead of only having the quiet, rigid gameplay style of Agent 47, we'll also have the intense action sequences, shootouts, brawling, and epic scenery of the Uncharted games. So think about it. The studio that turned assassination into an art form is now designing an action spy thriller with all the freedom to live out your favorite version of Bond. Want to complete an objective through pure stealth? Go for it. Prefer to instead blow some stuff up while slinging one-liners and throwing pool balls at bad guys? The world is your oyster. But that's just scratching the surface when you start looking at the actual mechanics that IO is planning, like the specific ways they're reimagining what a Bond game can be. And oh buddy, does this thing get exciting. And I want to be crystal clear here, while IO Interactive has shared some details about the setup, the actual plot is still mostly under wraps. We're working with confirmed character details and educated guesses based on what we've seen. What we do know for sure is that it is an origin story featuring the youngest Bond we've ever seen. He's just 26 years old. That's younger than any Bond in any Eon films, and it shows. This isn't the same suave, confident 007 that we know in his late 30s and 40s. This Bond is impulsive, rough around the edges, and hasn't earned those famous 00s yet. Nonetheless, it seems like a lot of care and passion has gone into creating this character. The tragic backstory is classic Fleming. Bond's parents died in a skiing accident, which shaped the man that he becomes. But here's where it gets interesting. MI6's elite agents aren't performing at their usual standards, so M, the director of MI6, is pushing for a younger, fresher blood in the 00 program. Enter Greenway, played by Lenny James. And this guy is fascinating. He's an ex-00 agent who's now tasked with rebuilding and revitalizing the entire 00 program. And Greenway assembles a group of candidates to try out for that 00 status, and Bond is one of them. But here's the kicker. Greenway doesn't think much of young Bond initially, and you can see that instantly in the trailer. And honestly, it makes perfect sense. In Fleming's novels, 00 agents have to retire at age 45, so Greenway's probably right after that cutoff looking at this young 26-year-old hothead and thinking, this kid's got potential, but but zero discipline. Now let's talk about the antagonists. The main threat appears to be 009, a rogue 00 agent, possibly that golden masked figure that we see in the trailer. And if you know Bond movies, there's always someone pulling the strings behind the scenes. And this is where my speculation kicks in. Looking at those trailer screenshots of what appears to be some kind of solar reactor or energy device, I'm getting major classic Bond villain vibes. Maybe a front company in renewable energy that's actually developing some kind of solar-powered weapon. First Light could be a reference to that technology, like the First Light of Dawn, solar energy harvesting. Of course, First Light could just as easily refer to Bond's beginning, his first mission, his first steps into becoming a 00 agent. But from the Bond lore perspective, the solar energy angle feels incredibly plausible. And let's talk about casting, because Patrick Gibson will be the next James Bond. And if you're not familiar with Gibson, Gibson recently had one of his biggest roles to date as a young Dexter Morgan in Dexter Original Sin. Prior to that, he had leading roles on Netflix's Shadow and Bone and the OA. Now, IO Interactive has a history of finding memorable actors to play roles in their games. Just look at their Hitman Elusive Targets featuring actual Bond characters like Sean Bean and Mads Mikkelsen. If they're willing to get that level of talent for temporary content, imagine what they're planning for the main cast of First Light. We also have confirmation via a trailer released during the 2025 Game Awards that Lenny Kravitz will be playing one of the villains. Now, he doesn't appear to be the main baddie, but one of the small-time guys that Bond typically seeks out for more information on his way to the larger target. Now, the supporting crew is also shaping up beautifully too. We've got the classic trio like Moneypenny, Q, and M, but Greenway as this mentor figure adds something completely new to the Bond lore. We rarely see other 00 agents in major roles, and having an ex-field agent guide Bond through this process, well, that's just brilliant storytelling. All right, so let's get into the meat of what this game actually plays like, because this is where IO Interactive's expertise really starts to shine through. Now, first things first, this is not a Hitman reskin with a Bond coat of paint. IO has been very clear about that. While both games feature that freedom of approach we love, First Light is designed to blend the sandbox elements with those big cinematic Bond moments that we expect. Think of it like this. Sometimes the level opens up and lets you get creative with your approach. Other times it funnels you into a scripted car chase with that classic Bond stunt sequence. But visually, this game looks incredible. The environments are highly polished with ray tracing, ambient lighting, reflections, and a level of detail that immediately stands out. This feels like a modern premium IO Interactive production, not a rushed licensed title. And combat is getting a major overhaul. We're talking dynamic melee with ranged action, with Bond constantly on the move. You won't find a lot of cover-based shooting here. Bond is agile, he's improvising, he's throwing empty guns at enemies to stagger them, lifting rifles off the floor with his feet like we saw in the Daniel Craig movies, and using the environment to his advantage while adapting in real time. It's supposed to feel kinetic and fluid, like you're actually in a Bond action sequence. Now, something really interesting shows up in the HUD. In the bottom left-hand part of the screen, Bond's watch isn't displaying the time. Instead, it functions as a multi-tool interface. You've got a compass, along with 2 resource indicators, a battery, and a bottle of chemicals. These resources are required to use certain watch functions, like the dart ability or hacking systems. Bond has to actively source them during missions. We see him picking these up organically from the environment, even grabbing supplies from something as simple as a room service cart. Other confirmed watch functions include a hack watch and a shockwave-style camera, and it's very clear the systems are expandable. As you progress, Q-Branch will likely add new functions and abilities, tuning the watch into a core gameplay pillar rather than just a secondary gadget. In the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, we see the instinct bar. The higher your instinct, the more abilities and dialogue options you have access to. Instinct fuels several systems, including focus, which allows Bond to scan the environment for opportunities that include dialogue prompts, hackable electronics, usable items, and situational interactions. Instinct can also be spent in other ways. Bond can lure enemies using a voice line to draw their attention, consuming just a small amount of instinct. Bluffing also plays a role. Certain enemies can see through suspicious behavior, just like in Hitman, and will confront you. You can't just talk your way past everyone. But beyond the tools that you start with, the environment itself provides situational items tied to specific opportunities. For example, we see Bond collect a lighter and use it to ignite a wheelbarrow full of leaves as a distraction to get past security. These distractions are vital when you need to perform actions that would otherwise draw attention, like climbing over railings, hanging from ledges, or moving through restricted spaces. Both climbing and ledge hanging mechanics appear to be returning from Hitman, giving you alternate paths throughout the environment. Vehicle gameplay is confirmed as well. Cars, motorbikes, possibly mostly boats, and if you saw that underwater diving sequence in the trailer, who knows what else they've got planned. The Q branch scene with that car under the tarp, that's almost certainly an Aston Martin, and you know it's going to be loaded with gadgets. Disguises also look like they're likely present, but not the main focus like they are in Hitman. The emphasis seems to be more on Bond's ability to suave his way through spaces using gadgets, timing, and movement rather than full identity swaps. Dialogue options appear during conversations with NPCs around the map, offering different responses to questions or statements. Some are objective-based, while others seem designed to reveal information about the environment. Now, listening in on these conversations can also open up new opportunities, including impersonation or alternate routes through the map. Some interactions don't consume instinct at all. These tend to be the classic Bond moments, the one-liners, the quick exchanges, like when Bond jumps through the window and gets noticed by the building staff. And based on the NPC voice lines heard in the gameplay reveal, Bond very much comes across as a ladies' man, which may make it a lot easier for him to charm his way past certain barriers, though that part is still speculative. It also appears that drawers, cabinets, and other containers are lootable, likely containing batteries, chemicals, ammunition, or situational tools, reinforcing exploration and preparation. But what really excites me is the replayability factor. IO is planning leaderboards, ongoing challenges, and that free LC system, basically free content updates that keeps you coming back. They want this to be a long-term universe rather than a one-and-done story. The environments are getting that signature IO interactive polish as well. Every location reacts to your choices, packed with secrets and multiple pathways. Whether you're infiltrating a high-tech facility or navigating crowded social events, there are always multiple ways to accomplish your objectives. Let's take a second to talk about some of the theories, wish list items, and the hype that's building around the Bond community right now. Now, we've gotten glimpses of laser watches and some infiltration tools, but I'm hoping IO goes deep into Bond lore. Give me that pen grenade, that iconic lighter from The World Is Not Enough, maybe a grappling belt for those vertical infiltration moments. The detonator watch would be perfect for IO's style of creative problem solving. And since we're talking about the Brosnan era, which, let's be honest, had some of the most iconic gadgets, how about that stun gun phone, the sonic ring, the EMP watch? These would fit perfectly with IO's approach to giving players multiple tools for every situation. And vehicle-wise, I'm really hoping we get that Aston Martin from Skyfall. The Q branch scene with the car under the tarp has got to be leading somewhere, but beyond the gadgets, I'm hoping for some serious fan service moments. Maybe IO recreating that bathroom stall scene from GoldenEye, but with their signature environmental storytelling, maybe something you don't necessarily see coming. Or that need a light moment from The World Is Not Enough. These little nods to Bond history could absolutely make the community lose their minds. What's really exciting is seeing how hyped people are getting for the single-player Bond experience, because after years of multiplayer-focused games, there's genuine excitement for a story-driven adventure that lets you actually become James Bond. What we're looking at here is a game that respects both the Bond legacy and modern gaming expectations. It's got the spectacle and style of the films, with player agency, freedom of choice, and replayability that actually makes the great game stick around. Now, after watching the gameplay reveal, it's clear that this game has a strong identity. It's rooted in Bond, it's not forced to fit outdated game mechanics. Even small decisions seem to offer multiple solutions, and because of that, I genuinely believe the replayability in First Light is going to be through the roof, even for people that aren't traditionally Bond fans. So let's talk about when you'll actually be able to play this thing, because there's some really good news and some potential concerns. First, the good news. First Light is not a console exclusive. IO's launching simultaneously on PlayStation 5, PS5 Pro, Xbox Series X and S, Nintendo Switch 2, and PC through both Steam and Epic. So there's no platform-specific content, no timed exclusive, no nonsense. Everyone gets the same Bond experience at the same time. The release date was officially set for March 26 of 2026, but unfortunately, IO recently announced a small delay, which is all too common these days, pushing the game back to May 26 of 2026. So with a little extra time to polish the game, I think IO will be in a good position to deliver a quality experience. Now, performance-wise, they're promising 60 FPS with PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution on PS5 Pro with advanced optimization for other platforms. But we're still waiting on details about the 120Hz modes for those high-end setups with ray tracing options and cross-platform features like save syncing. Now, location-wise, we've seen hints of Iceland and some high-tech facilities, but I want to know just how globetrotting this really gets. Are we getting the full Bond International Tour? Because the trailer suggests we're going places, but Bond is all about those exotic, high-stakes locations. Now, monetization is another area where we need clarity, and IO's notorious for being generous with the free DLC in their Hitman games, and they've mentioned the free LC system. What exactly does that look like for Bond? If they're following that same Hitman model, we might see cosmetic microtransactions for suits and gear, but the meat of the content always stays free. And speaking of suits, I'd bet money that you'll be choosing your outfit before each and every mission, just like in the Hitman games. It's such a natural fit for Bond's style. Another thing that's interesting is despite all that GoldenEye nostalgia we talked about earlier, IO's sticking with single player focus for launch. As of December 2025, no multiplayer mode has been announced. But here's where it gets intriguing, because Hitman is getting a co-op mode, and it wouldn't surprise me if IO's building that framework into First Light from the get-go. Maybe we don't get it at launch, but I could absolutely see co-op missions dropping as updates down the road. Imagine running those infiltration missions with 006. Oh, and if you're on PC, definitely wishlist this on Steam. I was doing community rewards where hitting certain wishlist milestones unlocks exclusive gear and insider access. It's a smart way to build hype and gauge interest before launch. And that's everything we know about 007 First Light so far. This could genuinely be the Bond game that we've been waiting for decades for, and I can't wait to see how IO pulls it off. So thank you guys so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like and subscribe. We cover all things gaming with a focus on action, adventure, crafting, and tactical shooters here. And if you're interested in GTA 6 content, I've got a whole playlist packed with analysis and updates, and you can check that out right here on my other channel. The link is down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.